When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled. I remember that so clearly. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled. It was a small, tight smile. The kind you give when the pain is too big for words. The kind you give when you are in so much shock, your face doesn't quite know what to do. I looked at her, standing there in the doorway of my own son's kitchen, and I saw the way her eyes flickered with something that looked like relief. And I thought, well, there it is. The moment I've been dreading for years. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight. It was quiet. So quiet I could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the one I had given them as a housewarming gift. Tick-tock, marking the seconds of my life there, counting them down to 0. I looked past her shoulder, into the living room where my grandson, little Michael, was playing with his toy cars on the rug. He was humming, completely unaware. I looked at my son, David. He was standing by the window, his back to me, his shoulders a tight, hard line. He wouldn't look at me. That silence from him, it hurt more than anything she could have said. I had moved in with them 3 years ago, after I lost my husband, Robert. A widow at 65, the house felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived. David had been so kind. "Mom, come stay with us," he'd said over the phone, his voice full of love. "It'll be good for you. Good for Michael. We're a family." I believed him. I wanted to believe him so badly. I packed my life into boxes, my china, my sewing basket, a few photo albums, and I drove across 3 states to start over. To be a part of their world. To be needed. The first year was lovely. I remember it with such a bittersweet ache. I would wake up early, before anyone else, and I would make breakfast. I'd stand at the stove, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the house, and I'd feel useful. I'd hear David's footsteps on the stairs, and then he'd come into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, and he'd give me a hug from behind. "Morning, Mom," he'd say, his voice still groggy. "You're spoiling us." I would take Michael to school. He was only 4 then, with big, curious eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. I'd hold his hand, his little fingers wrapped around mine, and we'd walk the 3 blocks to his kindergarten. He'd tell me about his friends, about the dinosaurs he was learning about, and I felt like I had a purpose again. I felt like I was more than just a widow sitting alone in a big, empty house. I was a grandmother. I was a mother. I was part of the heartbeat of a home. I helped with the garden. I planted roses in the backyard, just like I had at my own home. I'd spend afternoons weeding, my hands in the dirt, the sun on my back. I'd cook Robert's favorite recipes, pot roast, chicken and dumplings, the kind of food that takes all day to make and fills the house with a warmth that seeps into the walls. I thought I was making our home. I thought I was building a nest for all of us. I remember one evening, I was mending one of David's shirts. A button had come loose. I sat in my favorite armchair, by the window, the one they'd brought in for me, and I threaded the needle with the ease of a lifetime of practice. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, walked by. She paused for a moment and watched me.
"You don't have to do that," she said.
It wasn't unkind, but it was distant. "We can just buy a new one." "It's a perfectly good shirt," I said, smiling up at her. "Just needs a little mending. My mother taught me, a stitch in time saves 9. She gave a small, polite smile and walked away. I remember the feeling that lingered after she left. It was a feeling of being unnecessary. That my ways, the little things I knew, the skills I had honed for over 40 years were outdated. They were a curiosity, not a contribution, but I pushed that feeling down. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself that every family has its own rhythm, and I just needed to find mine. I tried so hard. I never intruded. I never gave advice unless I was asked. I helped with the groceries, I watched Michael after school, I kept the common areas clean. I tried to be invisible, but present. A shadow that was helpful, but never in the way. The small tensions started creeping in like dust under a rug. You don't notice them at first, but one day, you lift the rug, and there it is, a layer of grime that's been building for months. It started with the kitchen, that I love to cook. It's how I show love. But for Sarah, the kitchen was her domain. And slowly, I began to feel like a guest in it. I'd start making a pot of soup, and she'd come in and say, "Oh, I was going to make a salad tonight." Or I'd be chopping vegetables, and she'd gently move my cutting board to a different spot. I usually prep over here, she'd say. It was never angry, never cruel, but it was a constant, gentle push, a rearrangement of my presence. Then there were the small remarks. Little comments that landed like tiny pebbles, each one harmless on its own, but together they started to form a wall. I'd tell a story about David when he was a boy, and she'd listen with a patient smile, and then change the subject. Or I'd suggest a way to get a stain out of Michael's shirt, a trick my own mother taught me, and she'd say, "Thanks, but I have a special detergent for that." The message was clear. We have our way. Your way is the old way. And the old way doesn't belong here. I started spending more time in my room. That was the hardest part. I'd close the door, sit in my armchair, and just listen to the sounds of their life happening on the other side of the wall. I'd hear them laughing at the dinner table. I'd hear them talking in low voices. I'd hear David reading Michael a bedtime story. I was right there, but I felt 1,000 miles away. I'd look at the photo of Robert on my nightstand, and I'd whisper to him, "I'm here, Robert. I'm with our son, but I feel so alone." The loneliness was a physical thing. It sat in my chest like a cold, heavy stone. I'd watch television with the volume low, just to have some sound. I'd wait for someone to knock on my door, to ask me to come out, to be a part of something. And sometimes, Michael would. He'd burst in, his energy filling the room, and he'd grab my hand and say, "Grandma, come see my fort." And for a few minutes, I'd be pulled back into the light. I'd build the fort with him, or color with him, or push him on the swing in the backyard. In those moments, everything felt right, but those moments became shorter and further apart. Michael was growing. He was in school full-time now, with his own friends and his own activities. He didn't need me to walk him anymore. He had his own schedule. And as his need for me shrank, Sarah's tolerance for me seemed to shrink with it. There was one incident that I look back on now as the first real crack. I was in the laundry room, folding towels. Sarah came in with a basket of Michael's clothes. I saw a pair of his little jeans with a tear in the knee. "I can patch that for him," I said, picking up the jeans. "I have some denim in my sewing basket. I could make a little heart patch, he'd love that." She took the jeans from my hand. "It's okay," she said. "They're almost too small for him anyway. I'll just put them in the donate pile." Her voice was flat. I saw the way her fingers tightened around the fabric. And in that moment I understood. It wasn't about the jeans. It was about the patch. It was about my presence being stitched into her son's life.
She didn't want a patch from me.
She wanted a clean, new pair of jeans. A fresh start. Without my thread. I started to feel like a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. I was the old, worn, comfortable armchair in a room of sleek, modern lines. I was loved for my comfort, but I was an eyesore. And I could see David beginning to notice. He would come home from work, tired, and he'd see the tension. He'd see Sarah's tight lips and my quiet retreat to my room. He'd try to be the bridge. He'd suggest we all watch a movie together. He'd try to include me in conversations. But it felt forced, like he was trying to hold together something that was already coming apart at the seams. I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry for putting him in the middle. And so, to ease his burden, I started to make myself even smaller. The week it happened, I knew something was coming. The air in the house was thick with it. Sarah was quieter than usual. She and David were having whispered conversations in the kitchen after I went to my room. I'd hear the murmur of their voices, the rise and fall of tension, but never the words. I told myself it was a work thing or a financial thing. Anything but what it was. It was a Tuesday. A normal Tuesday. I had made a pot of tea in the morning, as I always did. I sat in the living room, sipping it, watching the morning light filter through the curtains. Michael had already left for school. David had left for work. Sarah was still home. She had taken the day off. I thought maybe she was sick. I was about to ask if she wanted a cup of tea when she came into the living room. She didn't sit down. She stood by the mantelpiece, her arms crossed. She looked nervous, but determined. My heart started to beat a little faster. I set my teacup down on the side table. "Margaret," she said. She never called me Mom. It was always Margaret. And in that moment, even my own name sounded like a dismissal. Yes, dear? I said, my voice calm, even though my hands were trembling slightly in my lap. She took a deep breath. She looked at a spot on the wall just above my head. She couldn't look me in the eye. David and I have been talking, she began. Her voice was steady, but thin. And we think it's time. We think it's time for you two to move on. I didn't understand at first. Move on? To the grocery store? To the garden? The words hung in the air, and then slowly, their meaning began to sink in. My vision narrowed. The room seemed to tilt. We've found a lovely assisted living community, she continued, her words coming out faster now, like she was reading from a script. It's not far, just on the other side of town. It has its own garden and activities and people your own age. We think you'd be much happier there. You have your own space, your own life.
I ser det her.
Your own life. I had a life. I was living it. Right here, with my son, with my grandson. This was my life. The only life I had left. David thinks it's for the best, she said, and that was when she delivered the blow that sealed everything. He's afraid to say it to you himself. Those words, they broke me in a way her own words couldn't. My son, my little boy whose hand I held when he took his first steps, whose tears I wiped, whose fevers I sat up with all night, was afraid to tell me he didn't want me anymore. He had sent his wife to do his leaving for him. He was standing in the window, his back to me, a coward in his own home. And that's when I smiled. The smile she saw. The smile that wasn't happiness, but a mask I put on to keep from shattering into 1,000 pieces on her clean, modern floor. I thought of Robert. I thought of the life we built. I thought of all the sacrifices we made for David. And now I was being packaged up and shipped off like a piece of mail. To the assisted living community on the other side of town. Forward if necessary, that I didn't fight. What was there to fight for? You cannot force someone to love your presence. You cannot argue your way into a home. I looked at her determined, pitying face, and I saw the truth. I was a problem to be solved. A burden to be unloaded. Okay, I said. My voice was a whisper. I had to clear my throat and say it again, louder. Okay, Sarah. I understand. The relief that flooded her face was almost more painful than her words. She exhaled, her shoulders dropping. We want to help you get settled, she said quickly. We'll pay for it. We'll help you move. It's for the best, Margaret. You'll see. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak again. I picked up my teacup, but my hand was shaking so badly that the liquid sloshed over the side, a hot brown stain spreading across the white saucer. I set it back down. I stood up, slowly, my knees feeling weak. I walked past her, down the hallway, to my room. I closed the door. I leaned against it, my forehead pressed against the cool wood. And only then, in the privacy of that small room, with a photo of Robert staring at me, did the tears come. They weren't loud. They were silent, hot, and relentless. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my back against it, and I cried for the loss of my son, for the loss of my grandson's daily laughter, for the loss of the home I thought I had found. The next few days were a blur. I moved through them, like a ghost in my own life. I started packing my things. My china, the photo albums, my sewing basket, the things I had brought with me 3 years ago. They were all going back into boxes. I realized, with a painful clarity, that in 3 years, I hadn't added anything new to my collection. My life here had been an echo, a temporary extension. I had never truly put down roots, because the soil was never mine. David still couldn't look at me. He helped me pack, silently. He carried the boxes out to his car, his movements mechanical. I wanted to say something to him. I wanted to grab his arm and say, David, please, don't do this. I'm your mother. But the words were locked inside me. The smile I had given Sarah was still frozen on my face. I wore it like armor now. It was easier to be polite and distant than to open the door to the pain that would swallow me whole if I let it. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Michael. I waited until his father picked him up from school. I sat with him on the front porch steps. The afternoon sun was warm. He was playing with a little toy airplane, making it swoop through the air. Michael, I said softly. Grandma is going to go live in a new place for a while. He stopped playing and looked up at me, his big eyes full of confusion. Why? Because it's time, I said, using Sarah's words. I hated myself for it. But I'll still see you. I'll still be your grandma. Can I come visit? He asked. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my voice cracking. You can always come visit.
He seemed satisfied with that.
He went back to playing with his airplane. Children live in the moment. They don't understand the permanence of loss. He didn't understand that after today. He wouldn't burst into my room every morning. I wouldn't be at the kitchen table when he came home from school. The rhythm of his life would simply adjust as children's lives do. And I would become a memory, a face on a screen during a video call, a visit on a Sunday afternoon. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tighter than I probably should have. I love you, I whispered into his hair. I love you so much, Michael. He squirmed a little. I love you too, Grandma. And then he was off, running down the sidewalk to show his airplane to a neighbor's dog. The day I left, it was raining. Just like in my memory now, the rain is always there. David loaded the last of my boxes into his car. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding an umbrella. She gave me a small, tight smile. We'll bring the rest of your things next week, she said. I didn't answer her. I looked past her, into the house. I saw the living room, the rug where Michael played, the kitchen where I had tried so hard to belong. I saw the clock on the wall, still ticking.
Tick-tock.
Then I turned and walked to the car. David drove me to the assisted living facility. It was a clean, bright place. It smelled like lemon polish and lavender. The woman at the front desk was cheerful, helpful. She showed me to my new room. It was small, but it had a window that looked out onto a courtyard with a single oak tree. It was clean. It was safe. It was not my home. David stood in the doorway of my new room, finally looking at me. His eyes were red. His jaw was tight. Mom, he said, his voice rough. I'm sorry. I looked at him. My son, the man I had raised. And I saw the little boy in him again. The one who was afraid. I walked over to him, and, for the last time, I placed my hand on his cheek. It was a gesture I had done 1,000 times when he was young. His skin was warm. I could feel the stubble of his beard. It's okay, David, I said. And it wasn't. It wasn't okay at all.
But I said it anyway.
Because what else was there to say? A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional. I gave him my smile, the tight one, and I said, You have your own family now. You take care of them. A tear slipped down his cheek. He grabbed my hand, held it for a moment, and then let it go. I'll call you, he said. I'll come by next week. That he left. I watched him walk down the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. He didn't look back. I closed the door to my new room. I stood in the middle of it, surrounded by my boxes, and the silence was so loud it made my ears ring. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I let the quiet settle over me. Weeks passed. Then months. David did call. He came by every other week at first, then once a month, then less. The visits became shorter. He'd sit in the stiff armchair across from me, talk about work, about Michael's soccer games, about the new deck they were building.
He never talked about that day.
He never talked about the tension. It was like the 3 years I spent in his house had been erased, rewritten into a story where I had simply decided it was time to move. I let him have his story. I was too tired to fight for the truth. I made a life for myself here. It wasn't the life I wanted, but it was a life. I tend a small garden outside my window. I play bingo on Tuesday nights. I've made friends with a woman named Eleanor, who lost her husband the same year I lost Robert. We sit together on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset. We don't talk much. We don't have to. We both understand what it's like to be here, to have had a life before, and to be learning how to live a smaller version of it. I thought about him every day. I thought about the house, about the kitchen, about Michael. I thought about the button I mended on David's shirt. I wondered if it ever came loose again, if he even remembered that I fixed it. I wondered if the roses I planted were still blooming. I wondered if Michael ever looked at the spot on the rug where he used to play with his cars and thought of me. And then, one day, a letter came. It was in a cream-colored envelope, my name and the facility's address written in a familiar, hurried scrawl. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was David's. My heart did a little stutter in my chest. I sat down in my chair by the window, the afternoon sun warm on my hands, and I opened it. It wasn't a long letter. It wasn't filled with grand apologies or explanations. It was simple.
And it was him. He wrote, Mom.
Michael came home from school yesterday and asked me a question. He asked me why you don't live with us anymore. I gave him the answer I always give. I said, Grandma wanted her own place. And he looked at me for a long time. And then he said, That's not true, Dad. She wanted to live with us. He's 7 years old. And he knows the truth. I've been pretending for so long that I almost believed my own story. But he sees everything. He told me he misses the way you made pancakes on Saturday mornings. He misses the way you would read to him with the funny voices.
He misses you, Mom.
And so do I. I was a coward. I let Sarah's fears become my own. I was so worried about my marriage, about my own little world, that I forgot whose world I came from. I forgot that you gave me everything. And when it was my turn to give something back, I sent you away. I can't change what happened. I can't go back to that day. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I did.
And I am so sorry.
I'm sorry for the silence. I'm sorry for the closed door. I'm sorry for not fighting for you. Michael wants to come see you this weekend. He wants to make you pancakes. I'm going to bring him. And if you'll let me, I'd like to stay too. Not just for an hour. For as long as you'll have me. I love you, Mom. Your son, David. I read the letter twice. The first time, the words blurred through a film of tears. The second time, I let each word sink in. I looked out the window at the oak tree in the courtyard. Its leaves were just beginning to turn, a soft gold in the afternoon light. I thought about the day I left. The silence. The tight smile. The weight of being unwanted. And now this. A letter. Not a fix, not an eraser. But a hand reaching out across the distance. An acknowledgement. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the small table beside my chair. I looked at the photo of Robert next to it. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel a pang of sadness when I looked at his face. I felt a quiet sense of peace. Robert and we had a saying between us. Whenever one of us had done something foolish, something we regretted, the other would say, We can't go back. But we can start from here. And that was what this letter was. An invitation to start from here. I picked up the phone by my bed. I dialed David's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Hello. His voice was hesitant. David, I said. My voice was clear and steady. I got your letter. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing. Mom, he started, his voice cracking. I would love to see Michael, I said, interrupting him gently. And I would love it if you stayed too. How about Sunday morning? I can make us some tea. I'm afraid I can't make pancakes here, but there's a little cafe down the street that has the most wonderful French toast. I heard a sound. It was a small, choked sound like a laugh mixed with a sob. Yeah, he said. Yeah, Mom. That sounds perfect. We talked for a few more minutes. About Michael. About the weather. About the cafe. It was simple. It was easy. It was the first step on a new path. Not the one I had dreamed of, but a path forward nonetheless. When I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the sun set behind the oak tree. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange. It was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, lonely silence I had known. It was a peaceful quiet, a quiet full of possibility. I wasn't replaced. I was set aside, and there is a difference. A family is a river, not a pond. It flows and changes, and sometimes it goes in directions you didn't expect. But the love, if it's real, never truly disappears. It just waits, patiently, for the current to bring it back. My door is open now. Not the door to a house I tried to make my own, but the door to my heart. I have learned that home isn't always four walls and a kitchen. Sometimes home is a letter, a phone call, a promise of French toast on a Sunday morning. It's the willingness to say, I was wrong, and the grace to say, I forgive you. I look at the letter on my table. I look at the photograph of Robert, and I smile.
A real smile this time.
One that reaches my eyes. The rain has stopped. The sun is coming out. And on Sunday, I'm having breakfast with my son.